Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, Christian Harris. Today I've got a guest from Canada called Dave Ferro, who's the president of DF Safety. And Dave has been working in the safety arena for nearly 20 years, primarily working in the construction space, but as of about 5 years ago set up his own consulting firm and has a range of clients in different sectors now, including oil and gas and lots of others. We talk about a few key topics. I was really keen to get Dave's experience of winter safety because as he talks about the winter conditions in Canada, particularly in his part of Canada, are vastly different to the majority of the audience listening to this here in the UK. But obviously coming into February is when our coldest month of the year takes place. So I thought that was pretty good timing. And we also talk about firearm safety because Dave's been heavily involved in delivering training for that for the government. We touch on COVID. Just interested to hear what happens and what's been happening in Canada. And also very interesting work that Dave does in the arena of post-incident loss reduction or loss prevention. So in other words, saving money, making the costs of incidents at work as inexpensive as possible by being quick to act, being proactive about how you act, and getting some specialist medical assistance and other things in place as well. So I'm sure you'll get a lot from this. And with that, let's join the conversation with myself and Dave Ferro. Cheers. Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me here. I appreciate the invitation.
No, it's good. I thought it'd be a good idea to talk a bit about winter weather and safety in that regard. And who better to talk about that than somebody who lives in the part of the world that you do, where the temperatures are very different to here in the UK.
This is true. We are in the part of the world for snow. We get winter weather 7 months out of the year, which is really good if you like skiing, not so good if you're a motorcycle enthusiast.
Yeah, well, I'm much more of a skier than a motorcyclist, so I probably get on okay.
Well, we could trade places. We'll talk after the podcast.
We could do one of those house swaps or something.
Why not?
Yeah, might be interesting. I don't know. My wife doesn't really like the cold, so I suspect it might lead to a hasty divorce. But so perhaps we'll avoid that one. But thanks for the offer.
No problem at all.
So here in the UK, we're just into February, and February's our coldest month. So, but as you say, you have winter weather much longer than that. But I thought you might have some quite good tips that you could share for us to consider, for the audience to consider coming into the colder part of the year for most of the audience for the podcast.
Okay. Yeah. Winter really is about planning, and the winter season has such a big effect here that the Construction Owners Association of Alberta actually put out a winter works best practice back in 2014. And I'm very familiar with that because I chaired the committee. So if you want to be successful, especially when you're in industry, you really need to start your winter planning a couple of months before winter starts. I'm not sure if you hit the same problems where you are, but little things like shovels and traction aids and even scrapers for your windshield, if you don't get them ordered ahead of time, you might not get them until several months into the winter or the whole winter stock is gone. So yeah, pre-planning is definitely big on our list here. Even winterization of buildings. What we find here, once we get into winter, we have a couple of big problems that we see every year, and slip, trips, and falls is definitely it. We just get a lot of injuries. And so we do a lot of planning when it comes to how we're going to get workers from A to B. So we'll typically start a crew maybe an hour early just for snow shoveling and cleaning. And we'll get them to sand designated walkways out so that by the time the main workforce gets there, they actually have a fighting chance of getting to where they need to be. So yeah, your planning and how you set up the job is going to be very big for you.
Yeah, that's interesting. I often get asked, because as you know, I sort of specialize in the area of slip, trips and falls. I often get asked about gritting and I don't know if it's a UK thing in terms of people's understanding of liability or best practice or whatever, but people say to me, oh, should I grit because I don't want to get sued if I grit and it doesn't work or someone falls over anyway or something like that. And I think, well, that's a bit of a strange way to think about things. Surely you want to make it as safe as possible.
Yeah, I'm not sure how it works over there, but if you inside in front of your own house here in Canada, you are required to keep your sidewalk down to pavement. So we use a fair bit of grit and salt and well, ice chippers.
Yeah, no,
You
that's
know,
definitely not. It's definitely not that way here. No, it's. I think probably because of the difference in climate, it maybe hasn't been thought about in as much detail. Maybe.
yeah, we routinely get minus 30 here in January, February. So that's where the ice chipper comes in because salt doesn't even melt the ice at that temperature very well.
No, that's pretty cold. Yeah, I'm trying to think how the coldest weather I've ever been in. I mean, I've been skiing in North America, and that's been pretty cold. But my wife once went to Chicago, and I think it was like minus 20 or something.
Yeah, it's funny. We in Edmonton here, we like to brag about how we're cold weather people, and then we get our guys from the Northwest Territories and Northern Saskatchewan laughing minus 40. We get minus 60. So there's a lot colder spots in Canada than us too.
Yeah, yeah, it's funny how the world works. Everywhere's a bit different. So other than sort of maybe not doing the planning and the preparatory work, well enough in advance, where else do people kind of typically slip up, for want of a better term, when it comes to this kind of winter safety planning and implementation?
Well, there's a couple other things that a person should be considering that a lot of people don't think about, and one of them is lighting. I don't know about where you guys are. Up here, we'll end up with just a few hours of light per day, right?
Mm.
So we find that we are definitely starting the day in the dark and we're ending it in the dark. So if you don't actually look at your site or your work area and make yourself a lighting plan, you're not going to make it. So we typically bring out self-generating light plants. So they run on diesel. And well, you can actually plug in your power to them. They get a generator as well with a big 4-light mast. So when we're planning the job, we need to plan that we have enough light, and you also have to plan where not to put your lights. It's very easy to blind people with these, especially driving heavy equipment and so on.
Yeah, that's a good point. I remember going to university in Scotland, and I would have my lecture at sort of 2 o'clock, and it would be dark by the time the lecture finished. So always a little bit depressing.
True. The other big feature we get here around Christmas is we always have a holiday shutdown for the most part when on construction sites anyway, where we shut down from Christmas to New Year's. So if suddenly your whole crew is going to be leaving, you have to have a little bit of a plan on how you're going to keep things running, keep things operating, keep the heat on, make sure everything doesn't freeze on you.
Mm. Yeah, that's certainly sensible planning, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whether that happens here, I suspect it doesn't really. I think construction, I mean, like in COVID times, well, we're still in COVID times, but you know what I mean? The lockdown times, construction was one of the few things that just carried on almost regardless. So I'm sure they keep motoring as much as they possibly can. And yeah, we just don't have the same level of cold, I guess, that you guys have.
Yeah, I guess the last element really that's really worth talking about is a bit of training. Because here in Canada, we could be working in northern Alberta, northern British Columbia. And if we're pulling workforce from, say, Vancouver, where it doesn't get below -5 on a regular basis, we could very well get people that don't know what clothing to buy, or even a new immigrant to Canada. We get a lot of people that, I don't know who's giving them the advice, but we have people showing up for the first time in Canada in October, right? Like if you're coming from a warm weather climate, you better be thinking about coming here in maybe May. So we'll get new guys in, don't know how to dress, don't know what frostbite and hypothermia is. So a little bit of training, even just on those basics, what to wear, how to do it, how many breaks you're going to take. Based on the temperature and the wind chill, we also mandate breaks. You can only work for 15 minutes and then you're X number of minutes out when it's really cold.
Yeah, that's sensible as well. And I suppose the other things would be like the practical things, kind of basics would be, I guess you have like snow tires and then footwear would be a big one, I guess, from a slip strips falls perspective.
Yeah, a lot of the big industrial sites will specify certain types of soles, and then others will go with traction cleats after. And there's a lot of different models. Some work better than others, but for the most part, if you do go with the traction cleats and you do a good job with your sand and grit, you can get through the winter without slips and falls.
Mm.
But it takes a lot of effort because it's just everywhere here.
Yeah, it's a much more intense problem in that circumstance than what we typically deal with, which is kind of swimming pools, kitchens, rainy day shopping malls, that kind of thing. Where it's there's a lot less factors to consider than when you're dealing with the snow and ice.
True. And the downside, if you will, to these traction aids is you got to watch where you're using them, because if you got a nice spiky traction aid on the bottom of your boot, and you go to climb a metal ladder, or you get up on a flat piece of steel, you've got no traction suddenly. So you've got to kind of choose what works for the different trade and the different application. There's really no one size fits all for everybody.
And don't step on anyone's foot by mistake as well.
I suppose not.
or go home and scrape your carpets off the floor, or do all sorts of other damage as well.
We actually see a lot of damage to construction trailers. The tile and lino floors don't last very long when guys start coming in with the traction aids on.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, because typically you have kind of linos and things like that, don't you? There, it's just like easy maintenance, cheap to install. But yeah, perhaps not thinking necessarily about everything in such a holistic way as you'd ideally want them to. So, other than winter, where you've got a real specialism, which you've explained, the other thing that really piqued my interest in your background was firearms safety. Will you tell us a bit about your involvement in that?
Sure. Yeah, that's a bit of an oddball thing. I've been teaching firearm safety for about, I think it's about 17 years now. And the course that I teach is actually the government mandated firearm course. There's two here. So I guess for people that aren't in Canada, I should probably explain. So Canada is an interesting place. We're about number 7 in the world for firearms ownership. And that usually catches people by surprise. We all know the States is number 1. They've got about 105 firearms per 100 people, depending where you look. We've got about 37 per 100. So Canadians as a group are actually pretty well armed, believe it or not. And there was an interesting stat I heard the other day. We've got more licensed shooters than golfers. So there's a lot of people that like to do hunting, a lot of people that like to do target shooting. And I guess it makes sense because we have a lot of wilderness and a lot of wild country where we can go and enjoy that type of sport.
Yeah.
So in order to own a firearm here in Canada, if you're talking a rifle, shotgun, hunting arm, we would call it a non-restricted firearm. You actually have an 8-hour safety course and then a practical and a written exam after. If you want to own a handgun or a similar restricted firearm, you have another 4 to 6 hours on another day, and again with a written and practical exam. So it's a pretty robust system. Everybody who owns one here now has a fair bit of training, and I'm actually a big fan of the system. I think it's very well put together.
So you can't just rock up at a random shop and buy one, as is the stereotype that we perceive from your friends down south.
Yeah, not at all. And I guess that's just the first step is your training. Then when you apply to the government for your license, it usually takes maybe 4 months. And they'll do a background check on you, and they look into criminal history and any psychological stuff. And the one that entertains me the most is one of our requirements is your spouse has to sign your paperwork. So I'm sure some interesting negotiations have gone on to get that signature. So a lot of guys are probably getting a new motorcycle, or maybe someone's negotiating for a new kitchen renovation.
Do you own a firearm or not?
Yes, I'm myself. I do a bit of hunting, so big game and birds.
What did your wife request then in exchange for signing the papers?
Actually, I signed hers. Is how it worked. She's actually pretty. With small caliber firearms, she'll outshoot me. She's pretty good at it, actually.
Okay, nice.
Yeah. So, and I also will compete with in handgun competitions. So, International Practical Shooting Confederation stuff, which can be a lot of fun on a weekend.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, it would be, I guess, weird if you were delivering this training and didn't have one yourself, I suppose.
That's true. Another big difference here is when you're talking about handguns in Canada, they can only be fired at federally recognized ranges. Otherwise, they have to be double locked. So when I transport it to a range, I need an authorization to transport from A to B. and I have to have a lock on the firearm. Firearm's unloaded, of course, and then it's locked in a second case. So they're double locked while being transported. So they're pretty secure.
Yeah. And what are the statistics in terms of, you see some of the stuff in the States with these horrific numbers of shootings and things like that? I mean, I guess, are you seventh in the world for that as well, or because you've got all of these safety measures and fail safes, are you sort of performing a bit better on that regard? Any idea on that?
We have it's interesting to look at the Canadian stats. So if we're actually talking about firearms fatalities, 80 to 85%, depending on the year, is actually suicide as opposed to homicide or firearms accidents. Accidents are the least; they're about 5. So this is where kind of a big one for us is I'm a big fan of our storage laws. So a firearm in your Canadian household has to be stored locked and unloaded. I'm a big advocate of gun safes, actually. The minimum standard is a trigger lock or a cable lock on your firearm, but if it's in your gun safe and out of mind, you're much, much better off. I have quite a talk with all of my students about mental health. I'm a big advocate for mental health and intervention and looking after each other.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and our storage laws also, I follow the news quite a bit. There was one fairly recently out of the US where there was actually 2. One, a young girl, I think about 12, was shot at a house because she found a loaded firearm in a closet. And the other one was where a toddler managed to hit the trigger on a handgun in a car and shot the mom and an infant son. I don't think they were killed. I think they were injured. And because of our storage laws here, these things are transported, unloaded, and they're stored, unloaded, and locked. We just don't seem to see that on a regular basis in Canada.
Yeah, well, thank goodness, because some of the things you hear are just horrific, aren't they? I mean, there's nothing you can really say other than that. I did last week's podcast was a predictions episode for the year ahead, and one of the predictions came from somebody involved in the insurance industry in the US, and he predicted because of some of the mental health issues from COVID and everything that's going on with the economy and stuff, that there'd be an increase in workplace violence, and he even predicted some shootings and things like that might well happen. So yeah, I said that's one of the predictions we hope doesn't come true, clearly.
Yeah, I would hope not. I'm sure it's the same everywhere. Mental health has taken a real beating here in Canada over the last 2 years, right? Lockdown, not getting out, not seeing people. And in some cases, boy, if you owned a restaurant and it's been shut down due to COVID or reduced in size, or if you work at a restaurant, you could be watching your life savings go, right? So it's been a very difficult time for a lot of people.
I mean, have there been any changes to any of these firearms laws and regulations as a result of that risk of, kind of adverse mental health, or have we not kind of caught up with that yet? Because I guess it's still quite an evolving situation.
There's been no changes to the Firearms Act specifically for that, and I guess if I ventured a personal opinion, I think we've got good adequate controls already in place for that. There was a prohibition of some classes of firearms here recently. So some more military style firearms like the AR-15, for example, or M14s went from being restricted to prohibited. So right now, anyone who owns one, it's in their gun safe, and you can't take it out to the range. It has to be locked and secured. And the government is going to let us know what they're going to do with that in terms of, can you keep it as a collector, or are they going to do a buyback?
Yeah. I guess that would be. Yeah, because if you paid for it, I guess they're not inexpensive, are they? So if you paid for it and then all of a sudden the law changes, then it's only fair to try to compensate them in some way.
Yes, a lot of the owners were target and competition shooters because the AR-15 was considered a very good rifle for that. So it's like anything else, right? If you race cars, instead of having a regular car, you're going to put another 20,000 into it. So
yeah,
if you're a competitive shooter, you're not going to have a base model. You're going to be kitting it out probably to make it more competitive at the shooting range.
Yeah. And then just touching on COVID a bit, I mean, how have you found, I'm not fully aware as to, kind of the ebbs and flows of what's happened in Canada specifically, but I mean, how have you found that whole situation, and what's been the kind of overall feedback? Of people been, as happy as they could be given the circumstances with how everything's been dealt in terms of restrictions, or I think there's been a few demonstrations recently, haven't there?
There have been, yeah. There's really, when you ask how COVID's been handled in Canada, you really need to ask how it's been handled in each province, because healthcare here is a provincial sort of a matter.
Okay.
So yeah, Alberta, for example, was it seemed like trying hard to keep businesses from being closed, and other provinces were quicker to close. And Quebec actually, for a while, had a curfew, so you couldn't leave your home after a certain hour at night, which was probably the most extreme example. So it's a bit of a mix. And yeah, there is a big protest going on where they've got a whole lot of truckers and a convoy going through, and other people. And I think it's pretty inevitable that we'll see this at the end of a 2-year run. People, I think, are just fatigued of masks. They're fatigued of not visiting family. They're tired of not being able to feel normal. And the predictions seem to be that with Omicron now on the decline, that things will normalize for us, maybe even in the next couple of months. Our Premier Kenny here in Alberta had a news conference, and he said that he was hoping to reduce the vaccine mandate restrictions by the end of March, I believe. So I certainly hope that that comes to pass.
So you've got some, is this kind of mandates whereby, to go to a restaurant, you have to have vaccination certificate, that kind of thing, or?
Yes, yeah. In Alberta here, to go into a restaurant, you need to have your 2 shots, or you have to have a negative test that was taken in the last 72 hours.
Yeah.
If I compare that to Ontario, they would not accept the negative tests, only vaccines. So a little different in the different provinces.
Yeah, it's amazing how varied the picture is in terms of, and I hadn't realised that it was a provincial decision there, and there were differences within the country itself. But even in Europe, there's been significant differences from country to country. I think it's Sweden has not done any sort of lockdown until very recently. I think they may have done one, but the first kind of couple of waves, they didn't do any kind of lockdowns or anything. But yeah, it seemed to be faring quite well statistically. And then you've got places like Austria being very much more hard-lined, and I think particularly cracking down on unvaccinated people. So yeah, it's very, very strange. And as you say, there's that fatigue, but I think it's not just the we don't want to wear masks. I think it's the uncertainty about livelihoods and things like that, really, that's getting to people, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, the response is interesting. And I don't feel I'm even qualified to even hazard a guess as to the right way to do it. But
No.
I think a lot of very intelligent people will be writing dissertations and things on the whole COVID response probably for the next 50 years. It'll be very interesting to see how they look at it maybe 10 years from now with hindsight.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, we'll have to do a recap episode in 10 years if we're still doing podcasts then.
It'll be interesting to see how it looks from the other side, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm glad none of this was my decision, because especially early on, governments would make the best decision they could, and things would evolve, or a new variant would come out, or we'd end up with more knowledge than we had. And yeah, tough times for sure.
Yes, it's the who was it, Donald Rumsfeld, who said the known unknowns, or the unknown unknowns, or the whatever. It was certainly a good example of that, wasn't it? COVID. Yeah, interesting times, as you say. So the third, we went on a bit of a COVID detour there, but I think that's interesting to hear what's going on in Canada. But the third topic we were going to touch on was all around post-injury loss reduction, because that's another area that I think you've done quite a lot of work on.
Yeah, so post-injury loss reduction is an area of safety I'm rather interested in. So for the people that might be listening that aren't familiar with the term, I don't know if we use the same term everywhere. This is after an incident has occurred and after a worker is injured, how do you reduce the overall impact on your organization? So there's a couple of really good things that you can do. And most of it, again, once the incident's happened, it's a little too late. You have to have a lot of things in place ahead of time to make this thing work for you. So I guess the first building block would be to have really good initial treatment. So that's on most of our industrial sites means we have an advanced care paramedic or something like that, or maybe an EMR or a primary care paramedic. Now, having the best person around to treat the worker is only part of the puzzle. It only works if the workers go there, because we've all done it ourselves too. You twist the ankle and you go, oh yeah, I've done that before. I'll just walk it off, right? And if your workers decide to walk it off and they wake up with an ankle the size of a grapefruit the next morning, now you're already in a bad starting position. So your first thing really is to educate your workforce on what the post-injury loss reduction program is and is not. And then you have to build a little trust with these folks too. If they trust you and they know they have your best interests in mind, they'll go to the first aid, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a big fear out there. If I report that I've been hurt, I'm going to make the layoff list, right? So we have to have some integrity as a company and make sure that we treat people properly when they are cooperating with us.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of step one. Mm-hmm. Something as simple as a strain and a sprain, and I'm always worried about ankles, knees, and backs. If you can get them in that first hour, get some ice on them, get some kind of an NSAID medication like an ibuprofen into them, it makes a big difference when it comes to healing, as opposed to walking on it for the rest of the day and sleeping on it overnight.
Mm.
So once we've got them in there, our next step is really to set up a modified work program for them. So depending on the injury, your paramedic might be able to do that, or you might need to get a doctor to do that for you. But the basic principle is that it always has to be done under medical supervision. You don't just want to take a guess. So if you are ahead of time on this, it's really good to have a relationship with a local physician that you can use, and someone that is familiar with your job site as well. So on the larger sites, I often bring the local physician right out to the project for a while and let them have a look, and they see what we are and what we aren't doing. And that's going to help quite a bit, because your average physician doesn't understand what a construction site looks like necessarily.
Right.
Because if you ask somebody, is construction heavy work or light work? Well, they would say, well, it's ultra heavy work. But most of us actually have a 50-pound rule in construction now, which if it's more than 50 pounds, you need 2 people or equipment to move it. Yeah. So technically, with the Workers' Compensation Board in Alberta, that would be considered medium level work. And it's kind of not intuitive, but construction, if done right, is actually medium versus heavy or extra heavy. And when you get a little trust with your physician too, then they're able to, prescribe what is in the best interest of the worker. And they also understand that what you can and can't offer. So typically on a job site, we can offer everything from sedentary work in the office to work in the field. And if your physician knows exactly what you have, they can use the concept, which is physio on the job, if you will. So if we have good information as to what the worker can and cannot do, sometimes we can actually tailor a job that actually works the limb or the injured part just enough that they actually will see faster healing and increase in mobility.
Mm. Yeah,
yeah. And the other really good person to have on your team is an occupational specialist physician. And on the big jobs, we often have someone like that kind of in the background. And having a specialist that really is good at this does help quite often. And often you can get them to work with your local physician as well. And a little bit of back and forth between them, they get a good treatment program, and you're really set, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. And clearly your clients are putting this in place because you've learnt these principles and you'll get them going. But I mean, if you looked across your experience over the last 17 years or whatever the number is, I can't remember now exactly, something like 17 years I think you said, what proportion of companies are doing this well versus where there's room for improvement?
I would say here, all of the large companies will do it, and anyone bidding to an industrial client will do it. And mostly that's because the big clients are very interested in who they hire and what their safety record is like. So if we're able to get people back to work quickly, it reflects well on the company. Prevention, of course, is better.
Yeah.
The other factor where we're starting to see medium-sized guys doing this quite a bit and doing a really good job of it is because it reduces your overall costs with the WCB, Workers' Compensation Board. And you can actually get rebates on your costs. So not only is it less expensive, you can actually get certain rebates and things as well. Mm-hmm. So it can make a big difference on your competitiveness. If you are at a 40% discount and your competitor's at a 60% surcharge, they have to overcome that at the bidding stage to even be considered for the job.
Yeah, yeah. And workers' compensation, does that work in the same way as in the US? Because that's a different legal system to here in the UK. So if a worker is injured here in the UK, we have what's called employers' liability insurance, and it isn't an automatic slam dunk that they get a payout, because if they're negligent or if there's other reasons, you can sort of pass that burden of reasonable practicality as to whether or not the company was at fault. You don't necessarily have to pay out. Whereas I know in America, it's zero fault, isn't it? A lot of the insurance payouts. How does it work in Canada?
Yeah, we have a no-fault system, so a worker is covered regardless of the circumstances. And the benefit to the employer is that the workers lose the ability to sue you in civil court. So it seems to be a good balance for us here. So the only time the employer would maybe not be responsible for it is if another employer caused the accident, in which case we can apply for it to go to the other employers. And sometimes motor vehicle things get a little bit interesting, because when someone's off your project, are they in their own car, but they're doing business for your company, and they get struck by someone who's a member of the general public, it can be a little bit of deciding as to whether it's compensation pays or insurance pays or how that works. Just depends on the circumstances.
Yeah. So in terms of thinking about the financial losses of an incident then to a business. So here we talk about, and the HSE talks about this, which is our enforcement authority. You have your insurable risk costs, which, for every pound of a claim, but there's the uninsured, the hidden costs, the sort of bottom line costs that are uninsurable. And they say for every pound of insurable risk, there's between 8 and 36 pounds of uninsured risk, and that's where this loss reduction, can really help. Is that similar, would you say, in terms of, or is this really about trying to reduce the, as you say, and get a rebate from the fund?
It's very similar here too, right? Anytime you have an accident, there's definitely a big hidden cost. So really, there's kind of a couple things, right? We have a moral obligation to our workers, and some companies are more motivated by that than others. And then we have the financial benefit. And the other big one I didn't really even touch on yet is the statistics for workers returning to work here is if you've been gone for more than 6 months, chances are you're never returning to work again. Your career is over. The faster we can get somebody back on the job, the better the recovery rate is. And a lot of that's psychological too. A worker typically would rather be out with their buddies and their friends and their coworkers than sitting at home, right? Feeling poorly, or maybe even feeling sorry for themselves, depending on the situation. So a rapid return to work, if done well, actually benefits everybody, including the worker.
Yeah, some big societal benefits as well. Yeah, I mean, everything. It always, having these conversations is always so interesting to me, because everything that everybody says that knows what they're talking about always points to, we need to be better, we need to prevent, as you say, we need to put these extra steps in place that when something does go wrong, we do everything we can to get things back to normal as quickly as possible. And yet you still hear these horror stories.
No, that's true. Some companies and some people just don't get it, do they?
Yeah.
And they take the wrong steps, or they're and some cases with small companies, it's a bit of cost prohibitive too. Like if you're a small janitorial company with 2 employees and someone falls down the stairs, breaks your leg, can't work for 6 months, you might have a very difficult time providing modified work for them, sedentary to desk. You just don't have it, and now the person's not available. So for some of the small guys, it can be harder.
I interviewed Martin Hall from Morgan Sindall, which is a big construction company here, a few weeks ago, and he was sort of saying that in the construction industry in the UK, it's the top tier contractors that are really driving things, and then the smaller businesses and the SMEs are following more slowly, but it is more difficult for them to invest in getting this right first time, or maybe not to invest in getting it right, but it's the trial and error element, isn't it? They can't afford to get it wrong so much.
True. And happily, though, there are some small guys that are doing some great jobs out there. I've got a couple of small clients that have come and they're trying to put in very robust safety programs before they have any problems, and just because they want to be safe and they care about their workers. So some of these small mom and pop organizations, they know their people well and they treat them like family. And I really like working with those small ones because when you talk, they actually listen.
Yeah, I think I think companies go through kind of this evolution, don't they, where you start off small and you know everybody personally and you've got that relation, you're the owner of the business, but you've got that personal relationship with everybody, and then there reaches this kind of slightly larger size where actually people start joining and you don't know their name, they know you but you don't know them, and then you get a new office somewhere else and you've never even never meet these people at all, and then you kind of get to that larger point where actually you then have the team and the systems and the processes are under you, and so it all kind of gets dealt with. But there's that kind of middle ground, I guess, which is maybe where some of these things perhaps fall through the cracks a little bit more.
True, yeah. And as companies grow, sometimes they're a large company working like they're a small company, not realizing they're what we would call maybe native knowledge, right? It's in everybody's head and they know it is no longer there because you've grown too fast, and the procedures everybody instinctively followed are just not there anymore.
Yeah, very, very good point. Very good point. Well, Dave, thank you very much for sharing those insights today. I really enjoyed it and learnt a lot, and I'm sure the audience will as well. Just wondered before we wrap up if you had any resources to share or sort of website links or any plugs to make or anything like that that you wanted to share with everybody.
Maybe just a couple of quick ones. So if you're interested in that Winter Works best practice, that's from the Construction Owners Association of Alberta. So www.coaa.ab.ca. And it's a great little resource that has everything from planning to even some sample posters. And it's available at no charge. It's about 55 pages long. I think you'll enjoy that if you do any winter work. If you want to get a hold of me or read any of my blogs or see what I have to say, my website is dfsafety.ca. So DF is in Dave Ferro, safety.ca.
Great. And you're active on LinkedIn, aren't you, for example, if people want to reach out there?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm always happy to answer questions on LinkedIn, or if someone wants to give me a call at the office if they're local. Absolutely.
Perfect. Yeah, LinkedIn is certainly where I'm most active, and so it's where I tend to see people, so I know if people are on there or not. So I always mention the LinkedIn because it's a good way of keeping in touch.
Yeah, no, you're right. I've been surprised at how good their resource is, because years ago when the job was over and everybody left, you'd have no idea where anyone was 5 years later, but we certainly do now.
Yeah, no, it is good. It is good. Good stuff. Well, thanks very much, Dave. And thanks everybody for joining us today. We'll be back next week, and we've got an interview with Douglas Barnett of AXA Insurance, and Dougie heads up risk management at AXA. So he and I are going to be talking about buying insurance and what you need to do to get the best, I guess, relationship between yourself as a business, your broker, and your insurer, and why that's in everybody's benefit. So I'm sure people will look forward to hearing about that too. Thanks again, and see you next time. Cool. Thank you very much for that.